You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. Have you ever wondered about the shadows that lurk in the corners of history? The figures whose names still send chills down the spines of millions, even though the truth about them remains shrouded in darkness. There was a killer who haunted the streets of Victorian London, his identity never uncovered, his motive never fully understood. A shadowy figure who left no trace, no clear explanation, and no remorse. A man, or perhaps a monster, whose crimes became so notorious that even today, more than a century later, people still search for the truth. His victims were vulnerable, caught in the web of a city teetering on the edge of chaos. But the real horror wasn't just in the brutality of his murders, it was in the chilling sense of power he seemed to hold over everyone. He wasn't just evading the police, he was toying with them, mocking them in letters that seemed to come straight from the depths of madness. He was known as Jack the Ripper, but who was he really? Was he a doctor? A butcher? Or perhaps someone far more sinister, a predator hidden in plain sight? Theories, speculation, and even conspiracy swirl around his name, but after all these years, the truth remains elusive. In a world where answers seem just out of reach, one thing is certain: his story isn't over. Not for the victims, and not for us. The question still lingers unanswered in the air of London's foggy streets. Who was Jack the Ripper? Chapter 1. The Dark Streets of Whitechapel. London in the late 19th century was a city of striking contrasts. The wealthy lived in grand houses in the West End, while the impoverished huddled in overcrowded, filthy slums in the East End. It was in the area known as Whitechapel where the darkness would truly unfold. Whitechapel was notorious for its poverty, squalor, and high crime rate, but it was also the heart of a thriving, if dangerous, district for the working poor. The streets were cramped, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, refuse, and the occasional scent of fish and meat markets. It was a place where the boundaries between life and death often seemed blurred. Here, in a town struggling with overcrowded living conditions, disease, and destitution, many of its female residents were forced into a life of prostitution to survive. These women, often broken and battered by life's hardships, worked the streets in the shadow of the city's grander districts, each night potentially bringing them closer to becoming a victim. The first murder attributed to Jack the Ripper took place on August 31st, 1888. Marian Nichols, a 43-year-old prostitute, was found in Bucks Row, her throat brutally slashed. Her body had been mutilated with surgical precision, with a deep incision across her throat and multiple abdominal cuts. At first glance, the murder seemed to be another case of a prostitute being killed by a customer or a rival. However, there was something unsettling about the brutality of the crime, something that hinted at a far more sinister predator lurking in the shadows. This would prove to be the first in a string of murders that would grip not only Whitechapel but all of London in a frenzy of fear. The terror that began on that fateful night in August would ripple through the streets of the East End, leaving a trail of bodies, panic, and an unanswered question: who was this killer, and what drove him to commit such horrors? Chapter 2. The Brutality of the Murders. As the investigation into Marian Nichols' murder began, the police initially believed they were dealing with the work of a regular killer targeting prostitutes. However, when the body of Annie Chapman was discovered on September 8th, just days after Marianne's murder, it became clear that this was no ordinary crime. Annie's throat had been slashed in a similar fashion, but her body had also been horribly mutilated, her abdomen cut open and internal organs removed. The way her organs had been taken was shocking. It appeared as though the killer had knowledge of human anatomy, suggesting that this was not just the work of a random madman, but someone with deliberate intent and skill. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion. These were acts of calculated violence, each murder seeming more deliberate and gruesome than the last. The killer seemed to be mocking the police by leaving no trace behind, no weapon, no identifiable prints, and no apparent motive other than the desire to kill. There was no robbery, no sexual assault, only the brutal slashing of throats and the disemboweling of victims. Then came the night of September 30th, which would forever be known as the double event. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both murdered on the same night within a short span of time. Elizabeth Stride's throat was slashed, but her body wasn't as brutally mutilated as the others. However, minutes later, Catherine Eddowes' body was discovered in Mitre Square, her throat also slashed, but her body had been eviscerated, her organs removed and displayed. This was the work of a sadistic killer who was evolving in his methods. It wasn't just about killing anymore, it was about inflicting terror, about asserting dominance over his victims and over the city itself. These murders became infamous, not only because of the brutality of the killings, but because of the lack of a clear pattern or motive. Was the killer targeting prostitutes specifically? Or was there something more to it? And most disturbingly of all, who was he? Chapter 3. The Ripper's Signature. What set Jack the Ripper apart from other criminals wasn't just the brutality of his murders, but the specific details that became his signature. The way his victims were killed pointed to a meticulous, calculated, and even surgical mind. The removals of organs, especially the uterus in some victims, hinted at a possible medical or anatomical knowledge. Some theorized that the killer was a butcher, a doctor, or someone who had the training to know how to operate on a human body without hesitation. But whatever his background, one thing was certain: Jack the Ripper was not a man driven by random chance. He was driven by a dark, almost ritualistic desire to destroy and disfigure his victims in a public display of horror. It was the removal of organs that first truly baffled the investigators. The women were often found with their entrails exposed, and the precision with which the organs had been taken led many to believe that the killer had some medical expertise. One of the most disturbing aspects of these discoveries was the way the killer seemed to toy with the investigation. Despite a massive police presence, he always managed to slip away without a trace. He didn't leave fingerprints, and no weapon was ever recovered. It was as if the killer was playing a game with the authorities, daring them to catch him. The media, quick to exploit the public's fear, fed the growing hysteria with sensational reports. Some newspapers even published detailed accounts of the murders, while others printed the letters that began to arrive in the police department. These letters, purportedly written by the killer himself, added fuel to the fire. He was taunting them, mocking their incompetence, daring them to catch him. And with every new letter, the public grew more obsessed with the idea of Jack the Ripper, elevating him to almost mythical status. The case was no longer just about the murder of 5 women. It had become a spectacle, a national obsession. Chapter 4. The Dear Boss Letter and the Media Frenzy on September 27th, 1888. A letter was received by the Central News Agency in London. It was signed Jack the Ripper, and it was unlike anything the police had encountered so far. The letter's tone was chillingly mocking, and it seemed to confirm that the killer was toying with the authorities. It was filled with gloating references to the murders, with the killer boasting about his ability to evade capture and mocking the police for their incompetence. The letter described in graphic detail the killing of Annie Chapman, and it promised more murders to come. It was as though the killer was not just committing these atrocities out of rage or hatred, but out of a need for recognition, to make sure everyone knew who he was and what he had done. The letter became a sensation in the media, and soon more letters followed. One, dubbed the From Hell letter, included a piece of a kidney, reportedly taken from one of the victims. The letter was both horrific and eerily impersonal, further mystifying the public and the authorities. The media frenzy that followed these letters only intensified the atmosphere of terror in London. Newspapers printed the contents of the letters, and the public became obsessed with the idea of Jack the Ripper as a malevolent figure who could strike anywhere at any time. The killer seemed to revel in the attention, which only deepened the public's fascination with the case. Chapter 5: Suspects and Theories. Over the years, the mystery of Jack the Ripper has given rise to numerous theories and suspects, many of whom have been the subject of intense speculation. In 1888, several men were considered potential suspects, but none could be definitively linked to the murders. Some of the most notable suspects included Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher whose body was found in the Thames shortly after the final murder. He had been dismissed as a suspect by police at the time, but some later investigators have linked him to the killings, based on his mental instability and the timing of his death. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish immigrant and a local barber. Kosminski was known to be mentally unstable, and he was one of the prime suspects at the time. However, there was no direct evidence linking him to the murders, and many historians now view him as an unlikely suspect. Sir William Gould, a prominent royal physician who has become a central figure in various conspiracy theories. Some believe that he was involved in a cover-up involving the British royal family, but these theories are largely unfounded and dismissed by most experts. James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant, whose alleged diary surfaced in the 1990s, claiming that Maybrick was the killer. The authenticity of the diary has been widely questioned, but the theory continues to attract attention. Despite countless theories, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery to this day. Many of the suspects were plausible at the time, but none were ever definitively proven to be the killer, and the case remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history. Chapter 6: The Social Impact of the Ripper. The Jack the Ripper murders left an indelible mark on London, especially on the working-class women of Whitechapel. The brutal killings forced society to confront the harsh realities of life in the East End, a place of abject poverty, high crime, and disease. Many of the women who fell victim to the Ripper were already living on the fringes of society, struggling to survive in a world that had little compassion for them. Murders also exposed the inefficiency and inadequacy of the police force at the time. Despite a massive investigation, the police were unable to capture the killer, and public confidence in law enforcement began to wane. The failure of the police to catch Jack the Ripper led to widespread criticism of the methods used by investigators and heightened the sense of fear in London. Media coverage of the murders added to the public panic. Newspapers sensationalized the killings, printing lurid details of the crimes and fueling a growing obsession with the case. The public was captivated not only by the brutality of the murders, but by the idea of a mysterious killer lurking in the shadows, untouchable and unstoppable. Chapter 7: The Enduring Legacy of Jack the Ripper. Even though the murders stopped after November 1888, Jack the Ripper's legacy has endured for more than a century. The case has become a symbol of fear, mystery, and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. The fascination with the identity of Jack the Ripper has led to countless books, films, and documentaries, each offering new theories and ideas about who the killer might have been. But the true horror of Jack the Ripper lies not just in his brutal crimes, but in the mystery that surrounds him. The fact that his identity remains unknown, and the fact that he has become a part of popular culture, has ensured that the legend of Jack the Ripper endures. As time passes, the search for answers continues. And while new theories and suspects are introduced with each passing decade, the truth about who Jack the Ripper was may never be known. Perhaps the killer's true identity is buried forever, a haunting reminder of the dark forces that once stalked the streets of Whitechapel. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.